Welcome back. A startup company getting ready to put a charge in the local economy. It's Cleveland's manufacturing history merging with its high-tech future.
The motorcycle industry, long regarded as a barometer of economic cycles, lifestyle trends, and global mobility shifts, has entered what many are calling the biggest market crash in its history. The year 2025 has already etched itself into the annals of automotive history, not because of innovation, but due to the scale, speed, and systemic nature of the motorcycle market's collapse. From the bustling streets of Southeast Asia to the luxury showrooms of Europe and the United States, the unraveling of this multi-billion-dollar sector has left manufacturers, investors, and enthusiasts stunned. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The signs of trouble were visible in late 2024, but few anticipated the domino effect that would spiral out of control in just a few short months. Demand began to falter globally, first in traditionally strong markets like India and Indonesia, where motorcycles are not just recreational, but essential for daily transportation. Sales volumes started to dip alarmingly as inflationary pressures squeezed the wallets of millions. Consumers who might have otherwise upgraded their bikes or purchased new ones held back, uncertain of what the near future held. Rising fuel prices only added to the hesitation, making ownership more costly in markets that relied heavily on affordable, efficient mobility. The crisis gained momentum in the early months of 2025 when manufacturers began to report record-breaking declines in quarterly earnings. Global giants like Honda, Yamaha, and Bajaj, once buoyed by the massive consumer bases of Asia and South America, found themselves grappling with bloated inventories and falling stock prices. Dealerships, burdened with unsold bikes, slashed prices in a desperate bid to stimulate demand. However, instead of reigniting interest, this move signaled panic to the market, prompting even more hesitancy among buyers. The perception shifted from slowdown to freefall almost overnight. Supply chain dynamics played a crucial role in accelerating the crash. Post-pandemic production strategies had seen many companies lean into just-in-time manufacturing, yet others, fearing disruptions, had ramped up production in late 2023. As a result, warehouses and shipping yards across the world were flooded with motorcycles that simply weren't moving. Logistics costs soared due to increased storage needs, and companies that had invested heavily in automation and smart inventory management systems realized they had vastly overestimated the resilience of the market. Factory shutdowns started to occur in rapid succession, with workers laid off en masse in regions where the industry had long been a source of steady employment. Adding fuel to the fire was the rapid advancement of electric motorcycles, which paradoxically both contributed to and suffered from the crash. Many traditional motorcycle buyers remained skeptical of the range, durability, and charging infrastructure associated with electric two-wheelers. Despite generous government incentives in several countries, uptake remained sluggish. Meanwhile, manufacturers had already diverted substantial resources into EV development, neglecting their core internal combustion engine ICE lineups. This shift alienated a significant portion of their consumer base who were not ready for the electric transition. In essence, they had jumped ahead of the market's readiness, and now both sides, legacy ICE and emerging EV, were sinking simultaneously. Global financial markets began to respond to the unfolding catastrophe. Motorcycle company stocks plummeted, with some seeing their market capitalization slashed by more than half within the span of weeks. Venture capital dried up for newer startups in the electric motorcycle space, many of whom had entered the market expecting a smooth transition into a green mobility future. These firms, already operating on thin margins, couldn't weather the sudden downturn. Bankruptcies followed swiftly, with some smaller manufacturers folding entirely and others being absorbed in rushed, undervalued acquisitions. Insurance companies also began to feel the ripple effects. As sales dropped, so did the volume of policies written for motorcycles. But more critically, theft and fraud surged. In markets undergoing economic stress, motorcycles became prime targets for theft, often stripped for parts or smuggled across borders. Claims skyrocketed, and insurers had to adjust risk assessments accordingly. Premiums rose, further disincentivizing purchases. It became a feedback loop of deteriorating demand and growing mistrust across the value chain. Even in high-end segments, Where consumers are typically more insulated from economic shifts, the impact was unmistakable. Luxury brands such as Ducati, Harley-Davidson, and BMW Motorrad found themselves in unfamiliar territory. The aspirational buyer pool shrank considerably. Motorcycles that once symbolized status and freedom began to gather dust in showrooms. Custom bike shops, which thrived on personalization and premium parts, reported massive downturns in orders. They too started laying off skilled labor, resulting in the loss of artisanal expertise that had taken decades to develop. Dealerships bore the brunt of consumer-facing failures. Foot traffic dropped by over 60% in many major cities globally, and service departments, once reliable revenue streams, started to feel the crunch as existing customers delayed or skipped maintenance. Financing options tightened as lenders reassessed the risk profile of motorcycle buyers. Interest rates shot up, and loan approvals dwindled. Without affordable credit, especially in emerging markets, the average citizen simply could not afford even the most budget-friendly models. The used motorcycle market, which might have provided a cushion in other downturns, found itself similarly overwhelmed. Owners desperate for cash flooded the market with their machines, saturating resale platforms and private listings. Prices dropped significantly, undermining new sales even further. Buyers, already on the fence, found compelling bargains in the second-hand space and steered clear of new purchases altogether. This dragged down residual values, impacting leasing arrangements and trade-in programs. Cultural shifts also played a subtle but powerful role. In urban centers, the concept of motorcycle ownership began to wane, replaced by rising interest in shared mobility and public transportation. Younger generations, already burdened with student debt and the rising cost of living, saw motorcycles as an unnecessary luxury or even a safety hazard. In countries where motorcycles were once rites of passage, there was now a perceptible change in attitude. What was once cool and liberating had become economically impractical and socially outdated. Governments were not spared from the fallout. Several administrations had extended subsidies and tax incentives to boost motorcycle adoption or to support the electric transition. With sales plunging and companies defaulting on obligations, the public sector was left holding the bag. Some regions saw political fallout, especially where local economies had depended heavily on motorcycle assembly plants, component manufacturing, or export revenues. In developing nations, unemployment spikes linked to this sector's collapse triggered civil unrest, adding another layer of volatility to an already strained global situation. Marketing departments within motorcycle companies scrambled to adapt, but the narrative had slipped from their control. No amount of influencer campaigns, nostalgia-fueled branding, or aggressive promotional offers could reverse the tide. Consumers had fundamentally recalibrated their priorities. Lifestyle biking communities shrank. Major rallies and trade shows reported record-low turnouts. And even online engagement with motorcycle content, once vibrant and community-driven, started to dwindle. The spirit of the industry seemed to be dissipating as quickly as its financial foundation. Innovation, once a hallmark of the industry, began to falter. Research and development budgets were slashed as companies entered survival mode. Promising concepts that might have rejuvenated consumer interest were shelved indefinitely. Collaborations between tech firms and motorcycle brands paused or dissolved entirely. Projects that had aimed to integrate AI, adaptive safety systems, or modular designs were frozen, not because they lacked potential, but because the runway for return on investment had vanished. International trade, already strained by geopolitical tensions and residual pandemic-era disruptions, became another casualty. Export-heavy nations found their primary motorcycle markets closing up, either due to internal economic distress or because of newly imposed protectionist policies. The collapse in one market had cascading effects across supply and demand structures elsewhere. For example, parts manufacturers in Taiwan and Thailand saw orders canceled overnight as European and American manufacturers recalibrated their operations. In turn, raw material suppliers saw reduced demand, shrinking economies of scale and raising costs for everyone involved in the chain. Motorcycle racing, often considered a glamorous and high-stakes spectacle, didn't escape unscathed. With manufacturer sponsorships pulling out and fan attendance plummeting, many racing series faced existential threats. Teams were disbanded, circuits left unbooked, and media rights renegotiated at significant losses. The impact on talent development was severe. Young racers lost their chance to rise through the ranks, and the feeder ecosystems that supported them with equipment, coaching, and logistics started to disappear. Perhaps the most jarring aspect of the 2025 motorcycle market crash is the sheer psychological toll it has taken on all stakeholders. Enthusiasts, those who had built their identities, careers, or lifestyles around two-wheeled machines, have had to confront a grim new reality. Forums and groups once filled with technical discussions, ride planning, and camaraderie turned somber, with posts increasingly focused on liquidation, job losses, and the sense of cultural loss. Industry veterans who had weathered previous downturns admitted this one was different, not just in scale, but in tone. The crash has opened up deeper questions about the motorcycle's place in modern society. Is it still a practical mobility solution, a recreational outlet, or a relic of a bygone era? As cities redesign infrastructure to favor bicycles, e-scooters, and autonomous pods, the motorcycle finds itself in a shrinking space, too fast for sidewalks, too risky for families, too expensive for the budget-conscious, and too environmentally controversial for regulators. Where it once bridged the gap between freedom and function, the motorcycle in 2025 now seems trapped in an identity crisis. This downturn has also illuminated the fragility of legacy industries in the face of accelerated change. Motorcycle companies, once thought immune to fads due to their deep cultural roots, found themselves ill-prepared for a world where consumer behavior shifts rapidly and economic stability is no longer guaranteed. The assumption that people would always aspire to own a motorcycle turned out to be deeply flawed. The 2025 crash has forced a collective reckoning, revealing vulnerabilities that had long been hidden beneath layers of nostalgia and brand loyalty. No single cause can be blamed for the current disaster. Instead, it is the confluence of economic miscalculations, consumer behavior shifts, technological overreach, and global instability that has brought the motorcycle industry to its knees. The biggest crash in its history is not merely a story of declining sales, it is a narrative of systemic failure, of an industry that raced into the future without a clear map, and is now paying the price in full. As the collapse of the motorcycle market deepens throughout 2025, the reverberations extend far beyond the immediate stakeholders of the industry. What began as a sharp economic downturn in sales and manufacturing has now evolved into a sprawling global crisis affecting everything from urban development plans to insurance risk modeling and even cultural identities in various regions. The sheer magnitude and breadth of this collapse mean that every auxiliary industry, every regulatory body, and every demographic that once interfaced with motorcycles, directly or indirectly, is now being forced into rapid, often uncoordinated realignment. One of the more overlooked but profoundly impacted domains is urban planning and infrastructure design. For decades, many cities, especially in Asia, South America, and parts of Africa, have designed roads, parking zones, and traffic flows with motorcycles in mind. These vehicles played a crucial role in alleviating congestion, enabling mobility in high-density urban areas, and bridging gaps in public transportation systems. The crash has now disrupted those patterns. With fewer motorcycles on the road, cities are seeing shifts in traffic behavior that are difficult to predict. Rideshare services and small car ownership are attempting to fill the vacuum, but they are less efficient in terms of space usage. Some municipalities are rushing to repurpose motorcycle lanes or parking bays into spaces for bicycles, micro EVs, or pedestrian corridors. This reactionary redesign, while perhaps beneficial in the long run, is occurring without the data or foresight necessary to ensure smooth transitions, leading to increased congestion and public frustration in the interim. Another cascading effect is unfolding within the educational and vocational sectors. Technical institutes, many of which had specialized motorcycle maintenance and engineering programs, are facing sudden declines in enrollment. Students who previously sought stable careers as mechanics, assembly line workers, or motorcycle designers are now re-evaluating their prospects. Scholarships and corporate sponsorships have evaporated almost overnight. Training facilities that once buzzed with practical workshops have fallen silent, and skilled instructors, many of them industry veterans, are being let go or reassigned to unrelated departments. The long-term implication is a growing gap in technical knowledge and craftsmanship that could take years to rebuild should the industry ever recover. Tourism, another industry intertwined with motorcycles, is also facing severe consequences. In regions where motorcycle tourism was a key attraction, such as the mountainous routes of Vietnam, the deserts of Morocco, the coastal highways of California, and the rugged passes of the Alps, the drop in activity has been devastating. Rental businesses that thrived on backpackers and adventurers have shuttered. Guided tour operators who once led convoys of riders through scenic routes and remote villages are now unable to secure bookings. Local economies that benefited from motorcycle tourists through accommodations, restaurants, and cultural attractions are experiencing abrupt declines in revenue. The charm of exploring the world on two wheels has dimmed for many, replaced by either economic anxiety or evolving travel preferences that favor lower risk and more sustainable options. The effect on motorsport academies and youth development programs has also been catastrophic. Aspiring young racers, once fueled by dreams of entering MotoGP or Supercross leagues, are finding fewer opportunities to participate in junior leagues or obtain sponsorships. These grassroots programs have historically been supported by manufacturer donations, gear sponsors, and community partnerships. Without the financial and moral support of the broader industry, these foundations are crumbling. Talented youth in countries like Italy, Spain, the US, and Japan, where racing is often ingrained in national identity, are left with diminishing pathways to pursue their ambitions. It's not just a loss of sport, it's a loss of generational culture and identity. One of the more peculiar yet significant implications is emerging in the world of cinematic and digital storytelling. Motorcycles have long served as symbols of rebellion, freedom, and independence in film, television, video games, and advertising. From post-apocalyptic sagas to high-speed thrillers and coming-of-age stories, the motorcycle has been a central visual and thematic element. But with the industry imploding and public sentiment shifting, creative producers are reevaluating how often and in what light motorcycles appear in new content. The aesthetics of the bike, once raw, cool, visceral, are losing relevance to audiences preoccupied with sustainability, automation, and digital connectivity. It's a subtle but telling shift in global narrative frameworks, suggesting that the crash is not only commercial, but deeply cultural. The economic dislocation has even reached the banking and microfinance sectors, particularly in regions where motorcycle ownership was facilitated through small loans and installment plans. Banks that extended credit to low-income workers to buy motorcycles, often for use as taxis or delivery vehicles, are now facing a flood of defaults. The collateral value of these bikes has plummeted, meaning repossession offers little financial recovery. In some developing countries, the default crisis has threatened to destabilize entire microcredit ecosystems, putting pressure on central banks to step in and stabilize affected institutions. The trust that had been built up around asset-based lending is being eroded, leading to tighter credit policies and diminishing financial inclusion for millions of informal workers who rely on mobility for livelihood. Environmental NGOs and climate scientists, who initially celebrated the potential shift from gasoline-powered motorcycles to electric models, are now confronting a more complex and sobering reality. The collapse has stranded hundreds of thousands of vehicles and components in limbo, either unsold, half-assembled, or scrapped. Disposal and recycling facilities are being overwhelmed with metal, plastic, and lithium-ion batteries, many of which require special handling. In regions without proper e-waste management infrastructure, this has led to environmental degradation, illegal dumping, and the growth of black market part recovery operations. Ironically, what was once seen as an industry on the cusp of green transformation is now contributing significantly to the environmental burdens it sought to alleviate. Insurance companies, which had already begun to adjust their models to accommodate changes in traffic patterns, are now scrambling to reassess risk matrices entirely. Fewer motorcycles on the road should theoretically reduce claims, but the opposite is occurring in some cases. Abandoned bikes, fraudulent loss reports, and organized theft rings have surged in certain urban areas. Additionally, some insurers had invested heavily in insurtech platforms tailored to motorcycle usage, which are now underutilized and hemorrhaging money. The recalibration of the sector is not just financial, It involves systemic rethinking of how insurance products are bundled, sold, and evaluated in real time. The labor implications of the crash are especially dire. Entire families in factory towns depended on motorcycle assembly lines for income, and the sudden halt in operations has led to cascading unemployment. Migrant workers who often traveled great distances for seasonal or contract work in motorcycle plants are now stranded without income, housing, or social services. In countries without robust safety nets, this has become a humanitarian issue. Makeshift protest camps have sprung up outside shuttered factories, with displaced workers demanding compensation or re-employment. Labor unions, which in some areas had grown complacent during years of prosperity, are now struggling to regain influence as desperate workers look for answers and accountability. The crash has also had an unexpected impact on cybersecurity and digital platform management. With motorcycle sales increasingly driven by online marketplaces and dealership portals, the sudden inactivity on these platforms has created security vulnerabilities. Idle systems become targets for hackers and phishing campaigns, particularly in emerging markets where digital infrastructure is less secure. Several high-profile data breaches in 2025 have been traced back to dormant dealership systems, exposing customer information, payment records, and even government-linked vehicle registration data. The industry, which had previously celebrated its gradual digital transformation, is now discovering the hidden costs of technological expansion without sustained operational activity. Intellectual property law is undergoing a quiet yet consequential upheaval in response to the crash. With many smaller companies going out of business or selling off patents to stay afloat, there's a massive redistribution of proprietary technology occurring. Larger conglomerates and opportunistic investors are snapping up rights to designs, engine technology, and electric drive systems at a fraction of their original value. This is consolidating power in the hands of a few mega entities, raising concerns about monopolistic practices and innovation bottlenecks. It also complicates the regulatory landscape, as new owners of these patents push for changes in licensing models, sometimes at the expense of fair use or regional adaptation. The psychological and social toll of the crash cannot be overstated. In many regions, motorcycle ownership is woven into the fabric of masculinity, adulthood, or independence. The abrupt loss of access, be it economic or cultural, has left a noticeable void. Social scientists are beginning to study how this shift affects identity formation in young men, particularly in communities where motorcycle culture was synonymous with coming of age or escape from poverty. Forums that once buzzed with technical discussions and riding stories are now flooded with anxiety, regret, and nostalgia. What was once a source of pride and empowerment is now being mourned as a lost era. Religious and spiritual organizations are also seeing indirect effects. Motorcycle pilgrimages, popular in countries like India, Japan, and Brazil, are witnessing steep declines. Annual rides to temples, shrines, or sacred festivals were not only acts of devotion but also significant community events. Their absence this year has affected local economies and disrupted social rhythms. Some temples that hosted thousands of riders each year now stand empty during peak season. In response, religious leaders are exploring virtual events and alternative transportation-themed blessings. But the loss of in-person community has left a spiritual void. Even the fashion industry has felt the impact. Motorcycle-inspired apparel, from leather jackets to riding boots, has long transcended utility and entered the realm of style. With the cultural relevance of motorcycling in decline, so too are the aesthetic references in mainstream fashion. Designers who built their careers on biker-inspired lines are pivoting, often awkwardly, into adjacent themes. Retailers report declining sales in categories associated with motorcycling, with younger consumers turning instead to climate-conscious, tech-friendly apparel that aligns more with e-mobility or urban cycling trends. Digital marketplaces and influencer economies that once thrived on motorcycle content are also experiencing a downturn. Popular content creators who built large audiences around reviews, vlogs, and bike lifestyle posts are seeing drastic drops in engagement and sponsorship deals. Algorithms are shifting toward other lifestyle themes, leaving motorcycle influencers scrambling to diversify their content or exit the space altogether. The monetization ecosystem that had made some influencers financially independent is collapsing. mirroring the wider industry that once supplied them with material, audience, and purpose. At the educational policy level, governments that had once promoted motorcycle-related STEM programs or apprenticeships are now diverting those resources to alternative mobility or tech sectors. Curriculum materials are being updated to reflect new priorities, such as AI-driven transport systems or renewable energy technologies, further signaling that motorcycles are being phased out not just economically but intellectually from the future roadmap. The long-term effect will be the gradual erasure of two-wheeled mobility from institutional memory, rendering it an obsolete curiosity in future generations' understanding of transportation history. The spiritual successors to motorcycles, such as high-speed electric scooters, autonomous pods, or drone-based personal vehicles, are beginning to emerge, but they do not yet command the loyalty or emotional resonance that motorcycles once did. They lack the storytelling legacy, the visceral mechanics, and the human-machine connection that defined motorcycles for over a century. As a result, even as these alternatives rise, they do so in the shadow of a legendary format now in decline. For now, they serve more as technological placeholders than true inheritors of the motorcycle's cultural gravitas. As 2025 progresses, the magnitude of the crash is being quantified in increasingly granular terms. Lost revenue, GDP impact, supply chain contraction, and job destruction. But beneath the data lies a more profound loss: the disintegration of a complex ecosystem that once connected engineering, passion, identity, and purpose. The industry is not just undergoing a business failure, it is experiencing an existential unraveling that is as emotional as it is economic. In this moment of collapse, what remains is the eerie silence of once bustling assembly lines, the faded tire marks of yesterday's journey, and the flickering taillights of a dream that is now riding off into the twilight. The downfall of the motorcycle industry in 2025 continues to unfold like a vast and intricate chain reaction, touching sectors and societies in ways few could have predicted. As more layers are peeled back, it becomes increasingly clear that the collapse isn't just the story of an industry in freefall, but of a global system confronting its limits. The consequences are sprawling outward into geopolitical, agricultural, academic, and even psychological domains. Every facet of human activity that once intertwined with motorcycle culture, however marginally, is feeling the tremors of this historic disintegration. As global trade routes recalibrate in real time, the economic vacuum left by motorcycle exports is hitting port cities hard. In places like Chennai, Ho Chi Minh City, and Nagoya, where docks once bustled with crates of assembled bikes and spare parts, activity has slowed to a crawl. Logistics companies that depended on the regular shipment of motorcycles and related components are downsizing their fleets or laying off workers. With fewer products to transport, supply chain operators are being forced to diversify into less profitable or unfamiliar industries, such as low-cost consumer electronics or agricultural machinery. Maritime traffic maps now show redirection and thinning around former motorcycle export hubs, leading to port congestion in areas absorbing the redirected traffic. Local governments that had invested in building export processing zones and free trade corridors tailored to motorcycle manufacturing and distribution are now stuck with underutilized infrastructure. Warehouses, container yards, and bonded logistics parks remain eerily empty, their advanced inventory systems dormant. Some cities are attempting to convert these zones into smart tech or green energy parks, but this transition is anything but smooth. Industrial real estate has seen a steep decline in value, and investment funds tied to these assets are underperforming, dragging down broader real estate markets in their wake. In the realm of energy economics, the crash has upended long-standing assumptions about fuel consumption models. Motorcycles, especially in developing nations, accounted for a significant percentage of daily fuel usage. Oil companies had crafted downstream marketing strategies and fuel blending formulations specifically for the two-wheeler segment. With that segment collapsing, fuel consumption patterns are shifting abruptly. Gasoline demand has plunged in some urban markets, skewing refinery output projections. This shift is forcing petroleum companies to recalibrate refinery configurations, often at enormous cost, while simultaneously dealing with surplus fuel stocks that must be offloaded through discounting or re-export. The decline is also impacting the world of small-scale agriculture in often overlooked but critical ways. In rural communities across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, motorcycles were lifelines, used to transport produce to markets, deliver veterinary supplies, or carry irrigation parts across rugged terrain. With fewer motorcycles in circulation and skyrocketing maintenance costs due to spare part shortages, farmers are being forced to revert to older, less efficient methods of transport. This regression is slowing the movement of goods, reducing income, and increasing post-harvest losses due to delays. Agricultural productivity is subtly but measurably declining in these regions, with ripple effects being felt in food prices and rural poverty rates. Emergency services, too, are experiencing operational strain. In cities where motorcycles were used for rapid medical response, particularly in congested urban areas, response times are increasing. Paramedic units equipped with two-wheelers were able to bypass traffic and deliver first aid before ambulances could arrive. In the wake of the crash, funding for these specialized vehicles has dried up, and mechanical support for existing fleets is dwindling. Medical NGOs and city health departments are grappling with rising casualty rates in scenarios where speed is critical, such as road accidents and cardiac emergencies. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the 2025 motorcycle market crash starting now? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.